Okay, so it's Wednesday, August 31st. Today, there's no real overarching theme. There is just a number of important updates if you want to understand what's going on in Ukraine. So we're going to cover them and we're going to be shifting gears quite a bit. But stay to the end because I want to talk about Gorbachev. And I'm going to look at an article from Pravda that talks about him. And it'll give you some insight into how the Russians are thinking even now about what's going on in Ukraine. Okay, so I'm going to start with the British military update. This is the intelligence update, comes out every day. Ukrainian armored forces have continued to assault Russia's southern grouping of forces on several axes across the south of the country. Ukrainian formations have pushed the front line back some distance in places, exploiting relatively thinly held Russian defenses. Wow, okay, and so this is where they were supposed to be massing, but still thinly held. Russia will likely now attempt to plug these gaps in the line using pre-designated mobile reserve units. And what they're going to do is draw them from the east, which means if you are Ukrainian and you're fighting in the east, now's the time to push forward in the east as soon as these guys start to go and retake some land. I don't know if that's going to happen, but that would be a good strategy, I think. Okay, Zelensky talking about active hostilities are taking place. He said throughout the temporarily occupied territory of Ukraine, from Crimea, notice how he's talking about even Crimea, to Kharkiv region, the Russian army does not have and will not have a single safe base, a single quiet place, said Zelensky. Okay, situation in Kherson remains difficult. Active hostilities continue, and I don't think this is going to be an easy thing. It's going to be slow. It's going to be grinding. But what I appreciate about this is that they're identifying all the things that have happened over the past day. 117 rashes, more than 30 pieces of equipment were destroyed in the south. Nine T-72 tanks, 3 grad. Now when I'm reading the list here is what you normally see. It's maybe a little bit more amplified because there's a bit of an ongoing offensive going on, but it's not like when you read it in RT and they just they make up a huge numbers of things. I don't think those huge numbers are legit. Here, I think that what I'm reading here is legit because it lines up with what has been. It's not just intended for propaganda value, as far as I can determine. IAEA mission arrives in Zaporizhia. Honestly, I didn't think it was going to be here so soon. I thought it was going to be another 2 weeks by the time that they would actually get there. So the Russians actually let them in. So it'll be interesting to see what they say about, what's actually gone on, or if they just stay neutral and look, we're just maintaining the nuclear power plant so nothing leaks. My guess is going to be some of the latter and none of the former. They're not going to make any political statements. They're just securing the nuclear power plant. But I'm glad they're there because they're still not in Olinkvinka, where the prisoner of war camp was blown up. I mean, the UN's not there. The UN, the Red Cross, they still haven't let anybody in, and Russia held it. Okay, Fedorov announces upcoming launch of war bonds, and that's really interesting. Um, the Ukrainian currency is either a C or CC. I can't remember which now. It's bad. It's in bad shape, and so war bonds are kind of a risk, but they're kind of not in a sense because the world is going to be working on some kind of Marshall Plan after this is over. We're now working on perhaps a key service for us on war bonds, the DIA application. That is their electronic application that does everything. They're pretty advanced with this. We'll have the opportunity to support the armed forces of Ukraine by buying bonds. I've not seen this before, but this is a pretty important step for them starting to raise some money. Burrell, this is a big story for the last 3 weeks, and I have mixed emotions about it. EU members agree on suspensions of a visa deal for Russia. It's not everything. It's not keep them completely out. It's going to go by a case-by-case basis, and here's why. Burrell announced a decision which falls short of the total ban on visa issuance some countries sought. On August 31st, and the reason why it fell short is because they need a unanimous vote, and they have like Hungary and a few other places that are have less of an appetite for this kind of thing. After the second day of a meeting at EU foreign ministers in the Czech capital, so what happened was this article actually adds a little light to it. The simplified procedure for issuing visas will be completely suspended. So you had a simple form, do this, you're in. Now it'll be a case-by-case basis, which is important because you have like legitimate security concerns. If you're Estonia and Lithuania, who have a very aggressive support of Ukraine, having Russians flood over that border might not be comforting to you. It's not a legislative text, but a political agreement that they agreed something must be done. First, a complete suspension of the EU-Russia facilitation agreement, a complete suspension, and then you can still allow it on a case-by-case basis, especially for specific groups of people who might be needing asylum or that kind of thing. So that's where they are. I think that's actually perhaps a healthier solution. I understand what Zelensky was after. I understand the Ukrainian sentiment. I feel very um, I'm really reticent to say like Russian protesters who are going to be penalized in their own country. I wouldn't let them in. I do want to let them in because I want them to spread the truth of what's happening in Russia in Europe so that Europe doesn't go to sleep on Ukraine. Okay, Zelensky signs a law as part of a customs-free regime, so they finally have completed that paperwork and they are now part of the customs-free regime within Europe, and that's actually a pretty significant step forward. The Vatican, for the first time, says it initiated the war with Ukraine, that Russia has initiated the war with Ukraine. Here's right from Vatican News, the language. As for the large-scale war in Ukraine, he's not calling it a special operation initiated by the Russian Federation. That's the language that has got caught in the news, okay? Because it was initiated by the Russian Federation. The Holy Father Francis says interventions are clear and unequivocal, condemning it as morally unjust, unacceptable, barbaric, senseless, repugnant, and sacrilegious. Okay, so it's this initiated by the Russian Federation that's actually news because the Pope has been reluctant to say that kind of thing before. And in the past, he's just said, please stop the fighting. We need to end the killing, but he has not made this kind of claim. Okay, political. What Politico is talking about what Russian school children are taught about Ukraine, and it starts off. I'm just going to highlight a couple of lines here. Vladimir Lenin once bragged, "Give me 4 years to teach children, and the seed that I have sown will never be uprooted." And that's why um, the Russians are actually paying school teachers or paying parents rather to put their kids in school in Ukraine. Like it's like that's what's actually going on. If it's a Russian controlled curriculum, you are at the forefront. This is Maria Zakharova lecturing teachers in Moscow earlier in the year. You're at the forefront of the information war. What? The information war? That sounds not so good. Zakharova's speech came right as Russian tanks were threatening the Ukrainian capital. That's something. No time was wasted in enlisting the country's school teachers in the effort to teach Putin's version of history. Some parents fear that the questionnaires their children have to complete, testing their level of support for the war on Ukraine with questions like, do you support the decision of the president of the Russian Federation to conduct a special military operation in Ukraine? Will be held against them. Yeah, they're worried about that. Yeah, it's bad. Russia's freedom has been a collateral damage in this war on Ukraine, and it's really significant. Okay, so while we're talking about information war, Zelensky is arguing that the EU should ban all Russian state media. I think this is wrong. I understand what he's saying, but I encourage you all the time to watch RT, read Pravda, read Test to see what they're saying, not because you want to buy it. And I get that some people are going to buy it and spread the propaganda, but it's the wrong approach. He said not a single Russian propaganda monitor should stay on the territory of the EU. Not a single Russian state TV channel should be allowed to keep working in the territory of the EU. Okay, I disagree. With that said, I'm going to turn to Pravda right now, and we're going to get some insight about how the Russians are thinking. This is Pravda.ru by reading this article about Mikhail Gorbachev, the man who saved the world to Western applause of lies. Okay, so I get that it's biased. I get that it's so as long as we understand that, that's okay. We're just getting the sense of what they're seeing. Here, let's read this article, or just some sections of it. Gorbachev took a course to improve relations with the West and contributed to the unification of Germany. At the same time, there was a series of bloody conflicts in the USSR during his rule. Like, the Russians are not really that fond of Gorbachev. Like, really, they look at him like, oh yeah, him. He was the guy that gave us that, right? No, it's good that the Soviet Union imploded. It is a moral good because it was designed, it was organized, it was structured for evil, for clamping down on your rights, for I mean, like, so you have liberty that you didn't have before because of this man, and that's a good thing, even if the empire, the strength of the empire was broken up. Okay, so listen to what they're saying. Many hold Gorbachev accountable for the violent dispersal of the rally in Tbilisi in 1989, when 21 people were killed. Same applies to events in Vilnius in 91. I talked about that yesterday. Go back and watch yesterday's if you haven't already. Where I was talking to the member of parliament, and he was talking about how, like, they were unscrewing the rails of the on the stairwell so that they would have something to fight with when the tanks broke in. Um, the results of Gorbachev's era were raised a lot of questions and debates. Some hold him up for the democratization of the regime, while others blame the politician for the collapse of the USSR, which they don't see as a good thing. They see this as a sad thing. Um, Let me scroll back down. We will not say anything new when we note that the assessments of Mikhail Gorbachev's role in Russia differ dramatically from those that one can hear in the West. The West took the news about Gorbachev's death with sadness and respect. As for Russia, one may not say that the Russians applaud Gorbachev. There is even a term that was coined in Russia, Gorbachevophobia. Okay, and here's why. Let's scroll back down. Interesting. Well, here's not why, but here's a little extra understanding about what's going on and tying it to Ukraine specifically, because I didn't know this, and I think this was really interesting. Interestingly, Gorbachev was a Ukrainian, a Russian Ukrainian. His mother and his wife, Rasa Gorbachev, were also Ukrainians. Mikhail Gorbachev always spoke with a Ukrainian accent. Khrushchev and Brezhnev, now I knew Khrushchev were also from Ukraine. It just so happens that it was natives of Ukraine who had played key roles in the history of the Soviet Union. Now, this goes back to this because Putin's doctrine is saying Russia and Ukraine were one people and one broader Rus, even if you're named something differently, and so you can't leave. Okay? The West betrayed Gorbachev, that goes on. The West was never a friend, and we can clearly see today that the West will never be a friend of Russia. Well, not at this point, not with the way that you have acted, um, subverting the world order. No, but that's not the case of where we were in 91 when Gorbachev um, dismantled the Soviet Union. Let's use your terms. The West was hoping, yay, we're going to have a democracy over there. We won't have a Cold War. It's going to be great. And it kind of didn't work out like we were hoping either. The West promised Gorbachev that NATO would not expand to the East. That was a lie. The West promised to respect the interest of, no, let me talk about that. Promised Gorbachev that NATO would not expand to the East. That's when the Soviet Union was a thing. If you Secretary of State Baker verbally said, look, reunite Germany, NATO won't expand toward the Soviet Union. But the Soviet Union went away. And the expansion came from all these Eastern Bloc countries that ran from Russia because they wanted to be free, like Lithuania and Poland, and what, like, these are the most hawkish, like, the West didn't hold a gun to their head and say, you're going to join NATO. They ran to the arms of someone that they felt would protect them from what they thought was a threat. So, okay, the West promised to respect the interest of Russia, and they want Russia to play in the democratic space, but they don't want to. That was the biggest lie of all. The West has been supporting discrimination of Russia and Russians and the Russian language in Europe for 30 years. We don't care about the Russian language. Like, we really don't. I mean, that's not a thing to us. Um, Gorbachev lifted the threat of nuclear war. True. This is perhaps the biggest contribution to the world history. Yet, we can now see that the West is being engaged in nuclear terrorism at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Really? Like, this is how Russian media is filtering this for Russian people. The West is taking the world to nuclear war. Okay, so I say instead of Zelensky's stance, which I totally get that Zelensky's talking about EU should ban all Russian state media. I say no, you need to read it. You need to understand where they're coming from in order to like see the big picture of this. Okay, that's all that I have for today. Thank you for your time, and I'll be back tomorrow.